All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're diving into well, it's an event from the American Revolution, the Burning of Falmouth.
Burning of Falmouth, yeah.
Yeah,
October 18th, 1775.
1775, right. So early in the war.
Yeah, very early.
Now, when we say Falmouth, we're not talking about the Falmouth you might be thinking of.
Right. It's present-day Portland, Maine.
Okay, Portland, Maine. So not the modern Falmouth
Yeah,
in either Massachusetts or Maine.
that's right.
Okay. And we're diving into this event. We're going to be looking at it based on these historical accounts and analyses that you've provided to us, and really try to get a better understanding of this event, what happened, why it happened, and what the consequences were.
Exactly. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. And at the center of all this is a figure by the name of Captain Henry Mowat.
Of the Royal Navy. Yeah, he becomes a key player in this story.
Okay, so let's set the stage here for this event. What was the background to this attack? What happened? What led up to this?
Well, by October 1775, things were pretty tense. After Lexington and Concord earlier that year in April, the British Army found themselves kind of besieged in Boston.
Mm.
And the Royal Navy, under Vice Admiral Samuel Graves, was tasked with, well, suppressing the rebellion.
Right.
And that involved all sorts of things, searching vessels, trying to stop supplies from getting to the colonists, even stripping down ships, salvaging equipment from shipwrecks, anything they could do to kind of get a leg up, right?
Right, trying to clamp down on any kind of colonial efforts.
Exactly.
Now, Falmouth itself had already seen some action before this, right? With something called Thompson's War.
That's right. Back in May 1775, the Patriots in Falmouth actually captured a few ships that were carrying supplies meant for the British in Boston. They also got their hands on some weaponry from Fort Pownall, which is up on the Penobscot River.
Okay, so that obviously didn't sit well with the British.
No, not at all.
And Vice Admiral Graves, he specifically targeted Falmouth in his orders to Captain Mowat.
Yes, he did. He instructed Mowat to lay waste, burn, and destroy such seaport towns as are accessible to His Majesty's ships, and particularly Machias, where the Margarita was taken.
Now, Machias is up in Maine, right?
That's right, yeah. The capture of the HMS Margareta up there, that was another big embarrassment for the Royal Navy.
So Falmouth wasn't the only target, but they definitely had it on the list.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so Mowat sets out from Boston Harbor on October 6th, 1775. What kind of fleet does he have at his disposal for this mission?
Well, he's sailing on his own ship, the HMS Canso, a 16-gun hydrographic survey sloop. He's also got with him the 20-gun ship Cat, the 12-gun schooner HMS Halifax, although some sources say that the gun counts on those might have been a little different. And then he's got the bomb sloop HMS Spitfire.
Bomb sloop?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Specifically for, launching those explosive shells into coastal towns.
Oh, okay.
And they also had a supply ship called HMS Symmetry.
Yeah.
So it was quite a force heading toward Falmouth.
So a pretty formidable force to show up on your doorstep. And it sounds like Mowat gave some thought to where he was going to strike. He apparently decided against Cape Ann.
Yeah, he did. He thought that the buildings there were too spread out.
Ah, okay.
So, from his mind, cannon fire wouldn't be as effective. He wanted a more concentrated target.
Right, where the damage would be greater.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so he arrives at Falmouth on October 16th. And by the 17th, his ships are anchored right in the inner harbor. So what was the reaction of the Falmouth residents to this, the sudden appearance of a Royal Navy fleet?
Well, it was a mixed bag. Some of the residents actually recognized the HMS Canso. It had been in the harbor before.
Okay.
So at first they didn't think anything of it. But the militia, they remembered Thompson's War. They were definitely a lot more suspicious of Mowat's intentions.
Yeah.
And they were right to be.
Right. And Mowat makes his intentions very clear. He sends a proclamation ashore. What does it say?
So Mowat's lieutenant goes ashore, delivers this proclamation, and basically it says that Mowat's there to execute a just punishment on the town because the people are guilty of the most unpardonable rebellion. And he gives them 2 hours to evacuate.
2 hours?
2 hours.
To evacuate the town?
Yeah.
Wow, that's not much time.
No, it's not. I mean, can you imagine?
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
So the townspeople, they must have been in a panic. They do send a delegation to plead with Mowat.
They do, yeah, including Dr. Nathaniel Coffin. They go out to the ship, and they plead with Mowat for mercy.
And what does Mowat say?
Well, Mowat says, okay, I'll tell you what. If the town swears an oath of allegiance to King George and surrenders all their arms and ammunition including their gun carriages,
Gun carriages.
then all withhold fire.
Wow, that's a tough demand.
It is.
Especially the Oath of Allegiance. I mean, that's really asking a lot. So what's the town's response?
So they start evacuating, as you can imagine, but they don't swear any oaths of allegiance. They
Yeah.
do surrender a small number of muskets, but they don't give up any gun carriages.
Okay, so it seems like Mowat's kind of set on this course of action then. He's given them a deadline of 9 a.m. on October 18th. What happens when that deadline comes?
So at about 9:40 a.m., Mowat, seeing that the town's mostly deserted, and his demands haven't been met, he raises a red flag on the HMS Canso. And that's the signal to open fire.
Wow.
And so they unleash this devastating 9-hour bombardment on the town.
9 hours?
Yeah.
What kind of firepower are we talking about here?
I mean, they're firing cannonballs of all different sizes, 3-pounders, 9-pounders. They've got bombs, carcasses. Those are, incendiary projectiles
Oh, wow.
meant to set fires. They've got live shells, grape shot, even musket balls.
Hmm.
One witness said it was like a horrible shower of balls discharging on all parts of the town until 6 o'clock.
It's hard to even imagine the terror that the residents must felt during this attack. And I read that they fired something like 3,000 projectiles during this bombardment.
That's right.
That's one every 11 seconds.
It was relentless.
Wow. And it wasn't just the bombardment from the ships. Mowat sends in a landing party as well.
Yeah, once the bombardment's over, he sends a landing party ashore, and their mission is basically to set fire to anything that's still standing. At this point, the militia, they're not putting up much of a fight. They're more focused on getting their families to safety.
Right.
So the destruction is pretty much complete.
So how many casualties were there on either side during this attack?
Well, there were some British Marines who were killed or wounded during the landing, but Mowat himself, he reported that the body of the town was in one flame.
And how much of the town was destroyed?
I mean, over 400 buildings and houses were either damaged or totally destroyed. And on top of that, 11 small vessels in the harbor were destroyed, and another 4 were captured.
Wow. So the town is essentially in ruins. What happens to the residents of Falmouth after this attack?
They're in a really tough spot. Winter's coming, and they've lost everything: their homes, their businesses, their livelihoods. A visitor came to Falmouth just a month later, and he said there was no lodging, eating, or housekeeping to be found.
Wow.
So they were completely reliant on outside help to survive.
So what happens next? I mean, how does the community respond to this?
Well, on October 26th, so just a little over a week after the burning, the town forms a committee to raise funds for the families who'd been left homeless. It's estimated over 1,000 people were homeless. That's at least 160 families out of a population of about 2,500.
So a significant portion of the town is homeless. Did they receive any aid?
They did. The Massachusetts Provincial Congress authorized a payment of £250, and they also arranged for the distribution of corn to those in need. And the aid actually continued for quite a while, even as late as 1779. So they were still feeling the effects of the burning years later.
Wow.
Yeah,
So was Falmouth ever able to rebuild?
they did, but slow. By 1784, they had rebuilt over 40 homes and 10 shops. And then by 1797, there were over 400 homes, as well as factories and offices and other buildings. So it shows remarkable resilience.
Yeah, absolutely. And the financial losses, I mean, they must have been huge.
The town of Falmouth estimated their losses at over £50,000,
Wow.
which was a lot of money back then. And there were also political repercussions. In 1786, part of Falmouth Neck actually separated and formed the city of Portland, Maine.
Okay.
And it wasn't until 1791 that the U.S. Congress granted 2 tracts of land as compensation for the losses from the burning. And those eventually became the towns of New Portland and Freeman, Maine.
So the burning of Falmouth obviously had a huge impact on the town itself, but it also really sent shockwaves through the colonies.
It did. There was outrage across the colonies. Mowat was denounced in the Patriot press. Newspapers like the New England Chronicle said that Britain was fully determined with fire and sword to butcher and destroy, beggar and enslave the whole American people.
That's powerful. And what about key figures like George Washington? What was his reaction to this news?
Well, Washington was at his headquarters in Cambridge, and in a letter to John Hancock, he called it an outrage. Exceeding in barbarity and cruelty every hostile act practiced among civilized nations.
And this event, the burning, it happened at a pretty crucial moment in the political landscape. It coincided with the arrival of news about King George's proclamation of rebellion.
That's right. The news of the burning arrived just as the Second Continental Congress received word of the king's proclamation. So, declaring the colonies to be in open rebellion.
And this really seemed to galvanize the patriot cause.
It did. The Congress, they recommended that some provinces adopt self-rule. They even suggested seizing Royal Navy ships.
And the burning of Falmouth, it seems to have played a pretty big role in the decision to establish a continental navy.
Yeah, absolutely. The attack on Falmouth really made it clear that the colonies needed their own navy to defend themselves. Just a few weeks later, on October 30th, Congress authorized the commissioning of 2 ships for the protection and defense of the United Colonies.
Okay.
And John Adams later called the Falmouth incident the true origin of the American Navy.
So what was the reaction in England to the news of the burning?
Well, at first they dismissed it as rebel propaganda.
Okay.
But once the reports were confirmed, the reaction was kind of muted. Lord George Germain, he was Vice Admiral Grey's superior.
Right.
He expressed surprise, but not really condemnation. He said that he assumed Graves had good reason for what he did.
Well, that seems a little out of touch.
Yeah, it does. But there were some dissenting voices in England. Some of the newspapers, they were very critical of the attack. They warned that coercive and sanguinary measures will produce nothing but the bitter fruit of ruin, misery, and devastation.
Right.
They could see that this kind of action would just further alienate the colonies.
And what about other European powers, like France? How did they react to this event?
Well, the French government, they were watching all of this very closely. And they were reportedly incredulous at the burning of Falmouth. The French Foreign Secretary, he called it an absurd as well as barbaric procedure on the part of an enlightened and civilized nation.
Wow. And how did this impact Captain Mowat's career?
Well, despite his service, he was repeatedly passed over for promotion.
Yeah, okay.
So it seems like the burning of Falmouth really hurt his career. He was only able to advance later on by kind of downplaying his role in the incident.
So it sounds like even the Royal Navy didn't fully condone what he did.
Yeah, maybe not.
Now, this wasn't the only time that the Royal Navy took action against a colonial town. Were there any other similar incidents around this time?
Yeah, there were a couple.
Yeah.
In August 1775, Captain James Wallace, he was in command of HMS Rose, fired on Stonington, Connecticut,
Okay.
after the people there prevented the capture of a vessel. And in October 1775, he also fired on Bristol, Rhode Island, because they refused to supply him with livestock.
Okay.
But in the case of Stonington, Wallace didn't use heated rounds or incendiaries. So the destruction wasn't as bad as in Falmouth.
Right.
But there was another incident in January 1776, the burning of Norfolk, Virginia,
Okay.
which was instigated by Lord Dunmore. That was another pretty significant act of reprisal.
So the burning of Falmouth, as we've seen, was a really devastating event for the town and its residents, but it also had some pretty major ripple effects.
Yeah, it galvanized the colonial resistance, and it played a key role in the creation of the Continental Navy. And it was condemned both in the colonies and in England and even in France.
So it really was a pivotal moment in the American Revolution, and it really highlights the human cost of war. I mean, these people, they lost their homes, their livelihoods, everything, but they were also incredibly resilient. They rebuilt their lives, their community, and it's really inspiring.
It is. I think that's one of the things that really stands out about this story is just the incredible resilience of the people of Falmouth.
This deep dive into the burning of Falmouth, I think it really leaves us with a lot to think about. How this one event in this relatively small town had such a huge impact on the course of the American Revolution. And it makes you wonder, what other seemingly small events have had a similarly outsized impact on history?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are probably many more than we realize.
Well, thanks for joining me on this deep dive. I hope you found it informative, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.